Hey guys, it's Logan again. Welcome back to creating your own advanced platformer in GameMaker Studio 2. In this video, we're going to be going over separating the layers in your sprite out and creating three separate sprites for your player. So we're going to be creating a body sprite, a jetpack sprite, and a gun sprite. And if you didn't follow along and create your own sprite in the last video, that's okay. I linked how you can download the asset below, and I will show you how to import it right now. So if you downloaded that asset and you want to import it, just hit create. Go up to sprites and hit create. And you're going to be presented with a blank image. Just name it S player. I'm going to name it player 2 since I already have a player. And then I'm going to do edit image. And when you go into edit image, go up to image again on the top, in the top toolbar, image, and select the menu option, import strip image. And that will bring up an explorer so you can find your saved file. So select your saved file, and for me it's S player basic strip. And it's going to open up your file and we're going to cut it. And for each cut, it's going to be a separate frame. So first we need to set the number of frames we have. Well, we have 3 different images here, all on one sheet. And there's 3 images per row, so we need to set that to 3 also. And then hit enter. And you'll see we have 3 images, but those boxes aren't the correct size. So to increase the size of those boxes, we go to frame width, frame height, and we know our images are 64 by 64. And now we have an even cut. And we hit convert. And there you go, you have 3 separate images. And I will show you how to separate these out. So to separate these out, just duplicate, exit out of your sprite, click your S player sprite, and hit duplicate 3 times, or twice. So it's going to be Control D, 1, 2, and now you have 3 separate images for your player. And to get these to be 3 different sprites, all we have to do is select the first image, your S player, delete the jetpack frame with the X button up here, and the gun frame. And to get your gun, delete the player frame and the jetpack frame. So I opened up the second image, the duplicated image, and I deleted the body and the jetpack. And for the third frame, or for the third sprite, I'm going to delete the body and the gun. So now you have a body, a gun, and a jetpack. And I'm going to hit F2 and rename these. Rename the first one to S player. Rename the second one to S player gun. I'm going to name it 2. And rename the third one to S player jetpack. And then go ahead and create a group. So right click your sprites folder, add group, name it player sprites, and then drag your sprites into there. And now I'm going to show those of you who created your sprite yourself in different layers how to separate the layers. And this is just as simple. So we're going to duplicate our player twice, Control D. And then we're going to go into our first sprite, our S player. Then we're going to actually open up the editor, and we're just going to delete the layers we don't want. So we don't want the gun layer in this one. We don't want the jetpack layer. We just want the body, and there we go. Then I'm going to exit out of that sprite, go to the second sprite, do the same thing but with the other images. So I want to isolate the gun and delete the body and the jetpack. Just hit the exit button, go to the third. I want to delete the jetpack, or no, I want to delete the gun and the body, and now I have the jetpack. And then we're going to rename these. So we have S player, and then we have S player gun, so I'm going to hit F2. S player gun, and finally S player jetpack. Oops, that's already in use. I'm going to go ahead and delete my extra folder. Don't delete your folder. I just had 2 of them. Okay, splayer jetpack. All right, so now you should have 3 sprites. We don't need to change where they're located in the image. Leave them there. It's really important, and I'll show you why. So the next thing we want to do is change the origin. And this is going to be important for when we flip the image using image X scale. So I already have this set. It's by default set to 0, 0 top left is where your origin is. Go ahead and click the drop down and click top center. This is on your player sprite. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for the other 2 sprites, the gun and the jetpack. Open them up. Make sure that the origin is at the top center. And you'll see the little arrow thing here. Top center. So for all 3 sprites, good to go. And like I said, now when we flip this image, it's actually going to flip on this axis right here. So it's not going to move the sprite. And if it's not completely centered, I can't really tell. I believe it's completely centered, but if it's not, it'll only move a pixel or so. If it was on the top left, so that arrow's on the top left, this entire image would flip and your sprite would actually move or seem to move by 32 pixels, I believe, to the left. But again, we're just going to leave it at top center. And now we're ready to get our player to face the correct direction, and we're ready to create our gun. So the first thing we're going to do is create our gun object. So let's go down to objects, and I'm going to delete this. Let's create an object called player gun. And let's set the sprite to our gun sprite. And the reason that I am creating a separate object for the gun instead of just using the draw function in the player to draw it on top of him is because what if we want to have multiple guns later? We could just switch the object that's created, and each object could have their own implementations of fire rate or recoil or projectile type. So it's really easy for us to program different weapons and allow changing for the player. So I'm going to go ahead and create a player folder since we have more than one object now in the object. So let's do more than one player related object. So let's create it, player objects. I'm just going to name it player. And then drag our player and our gun into those, and I'm going to move it above the others, the folder above the others, because we're going to access the player a lot. All right, so the first thing we need to do is create the gun, and we want that to create after the player is created, because our gun is going to be trying to move to the player, and if our gun's created first and the player doesn't exist in our room yet, then the gun may try to move to the position of the player, but when it tries to get that position, the player doesn't exist and it throws an error at us. So how we can avoid this is going into our scripts in our player folder and go to initialize player script. Remember, this is ran in our create event. I'm going to go ahead and comment that in actually. This script is run from our create event, our players create event. Players create event. And this is to help you if you come back a year from now or you have a new developer join your team, they open up the game, they open up the source code and they open these scripts. They don't want to have to dig through all the objects and see where these are used. So anytime you use a script, try to add maybe at the top where the script is being called from. That way it's easy to locate where errors are coming from or add things to it later on. Okay, so next we need to create our gun object in code. So how we do this, remember GameMaker uses a layer system, and I'm going to open up the room, you don't have to. Remember in our room we have an instance layer, and we only have one instance layer right now, and this is kind of like a Photoshop layer for objects. So an instance layer with a smaller depth will be closer to us. An instance layer with a greater depth will be further away from us. Right now, if our player is created and we create the gun on the same layer as the player, after the player has been created, it may or may not put the gun behind the player, and we don't want that. We want it to be in front of the player. So one way we can do this without having to do the code to create a new layer just for the gun is we can use the function instance create depth. Now, do not use this for all of your different objects, because when we do this, GameMaker behind the scenes actually creates a new layer. So a new one of those things we were just looking at creates a new instance layer for that specific object. So this is okay for our gun for now. So, but again, don't use this for every time you create an object. If you want objects at the same level of depth, then either create a new layer in the room, create a new layer in code, and assign all those objects to that layer using instance create layer, this function. And this will create an instance on a specified layer ID, which is a string. And in the case of our instances, the string would be instances. Just like that, it would create our object on that layer. So we're going back, instance create depth, and we're going to add our x and y, our player's x and y value, same coordinate, and we're going to do our depth -1, and that'll create it directly on top of us. And what are we creating? We're creating an object player gun, player gun. And our red should go away, and you should have this exact thing. And let's go ahead and comment this in. Create our gun object, and be sure that it is on top of our player, not behind. Okay, so let's see. Now if we run the game, we should get our gun on top of our player, but it's actually above our player. And let's see why that is. Player gun should work. Default origin 32. Let me run this one more time and see what's going on. Oh, of course. I should have moved to the character. So we created our gun in the air, but we don't have any code to make our gun follow the player. You see he's kind of flying around without the gun right now. So we need to create a step event for our gun. And we're going to go ahead, we aren't going to use a script for this because our gun step event might not be something that we use all the time. And on top of that, it's probably not going to contain a whole lot of code. So we're just going to open up our player gun. And in this case, we're going to create our step event. And we're going to write our code right in here. No big deal. And let's go ahead and create a description. Updates guns position for now. We could change it later. And next, we are going to update our gun's position. So what are we updating it to? Well, remember, we're in our gun object. So we're updating the X position. And for now, we're just going to set it to our oPlayer.x. So we're going to keep our X position the same as our player's position on the horizontal axis. And you'll see it here. You see? But we haven't updated our Y value yet. So now let's update our Y. And for this one, we're going to use a little trick with the lerp function, and it's going to give us a little bit of an effect. Actually, first I want to demonstrate without the lerp function. So let's do y equals oPlayer.y and hit play. And you'll see that it's very static. It's just sticking on our player. But maybe we could make it a little bit floaty. So when we're in the air and we're falling, it's like his arms are kind of raising up. So how do we do that? Okay, so we're going to use linear interpolation. So our lerp function takes in two values. So we give it two values. And then we give it a percentage to move in between those two values. Or not move, but return a point between those two values. And let's say we put 0.5 here. It's going to return the distance halfway between these 2 points. And I'll give you a quick example. So let's say we're using lerp. Let's give it 0 and 10, and then 0.5 as our third value. This would actually return 5. This would equal 5. That's what it would return. Basically, you could think of it, it took 10, subtracted 0, and then multiplied by 5. Or let's do lerp 0, 10, and then 2 is our third value. This, you guessed it, would return 20. And that's similar to what we're doing. And you can see with this function, the further away our y value gets from our player's y value, so let's say we're falling at a high speed, the further distance that this becomes, the more that this function's going to return. So it's actually going to make us move further. So we can't ever get to a distance where our gun is too far from the player and it looks weird. So you'll see it's kind of floaty, and let's fall a long distance. That's not too bad. Might be a little bit too floaty for me, so let's increase it to 0.7 or 0.6. Let's try 0.6. There you go. That looks pretty decent. Awesome. So next, let's make our player face the direction that we are moving. So to do this, let's go into our player's update player movement script. And how are we going to do this? Well, we want to be facing the same direction that we are moving. So maybe we could just use image X scale. Remember, we can flip the image by giving our X scale a negative number. So what negative number do we have? Well, we can just use sine X speed. I believe this might return 0 sometimes. Let's go ahead and check it out. Let's just do image X scale in our player update movement and make it equal to sine of our X speed. But if our X speed gets to 0, we may have an issue. Oh yeah. That's super weird. So let's not do sine X speed. Let's do a quick if statement to fix this. If X speed is greater than 0, let's do image X scale equals 1. Let's do an else if X speed is less than 0, image X scale equals -1. Now let's see if that works out better for us. Yeah, that works great. But our gun is not flipping, so how do we fix that? Simple. Let's go back to our player's gun, and let's, under the coordinate update, let's update the X scale to equal our player's X scale. So we do this, we can grab values from other objects by using their object's name, and then a dot, and then the variable name from that object. And now this is referencing the player's image X scale. So it's setting our gun's image X scale to that same image X scale as the player. And now we're facing the right direction. Our gun's kind of floaty. Looking pretty good. We do have this small bug, and I'll show you guys how to fix that in a future video. It only happens on the, if you move to the right wall and then hold down both the left and right buttons. But for now, we just need to draw the jetpack. So how do we do that? Let's go into our player's draw event. So go to player, add event, draw, and update players, or let's say draw player and player objects. So we need to draw, anytime we use the draw function, we have to draw ourselves. So we're going to use draw sprites. We're going to draw image in our image index, or our sprite index. Subimage is going to be -1, x, and y. We're actually going to have to use ext, which is draw sprite extended. So let's change it to _ext. And we have the first few values, and you can see down here, we have to enter a lot more stuff. So first it wants our sprite index, then it wants the sub image to play, which right now, let's go ahead and use image index for our sub image. And then it wants our x and y coordinate. Then it wants our x scale. Well, remember, we're changing our x scale, so let's go ahead and do image x scale. And it wants our y scale. Let's go ahead and image y scale, which is passing in the value that our object holds for these. These are built-in variables that we didn't have to define. They were automatically defined by GameMaker. And then our rotation, 0. Our color is C white. It's not the color of our player, but using C white is default, and it'll just color our player as is in its sprite. And then our alpha is our transparency. Let's just go ahead and do a solid transparency of 1. And let's copy and paste this. And next, we're going to draw our jetpack. So we pass in, instead of sprite index, our sPlayer jetpack sprite. And then not image index, because it could be different. It only has an image index of 0 right now, so we just pass in 0. And then we want it at our x and y coordinate, and we want it to have the same x scale as our player, same y scale, no rotation, white, and not transparent. And now if we run the game, we should have all three, our jetpack, our player, and our gun playing. And you see that our jetpack is drawn on top of our player right now. We can easily fix that. Let's draw the jetpack first. So let's just cut and paste above the draw player. And we can go ahead and label these draw player and draw jetpack, so it's easier to read. So we're drawing the jetpack first, then we're drawing the player. It's drawing the player on top of the jetpack. And now we should be good to go. Awesome. So that should work. Let me know if you'll find any additional bugs or things you want to see fixed. In the next video, we're going to start animating our player, doing the eyes, the gun animations, the running animation. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I try to answer every comment. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.